Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.
And from then onwards, like Star Wars was a big part of my life and my personality. Whilst I hid it badly behind mild-mannered historian, like beneath the surface, you didn't have to go too far to find like raging Star Wars geek.
Hello there, this is Dave, and I'm an original trilogy kid.
And this is Laura, and I'm a prequel trilogy kid.
Welcome to What Does Star Wars Mean to You, the show where we talk to all kinds of fans of Star Wars to take the hate out of the debate and look at the franchise from a certain point of view, one fan at a time.
And we're very excited because our guest today is a historian of both our world and that of the galaxy far, far away. He specializes in both transnational experiences of warfare and modern representations of history, mostly computer games and the Star Wars franchise, which I'm very excited to talk about later. He's currently the president for the International Society for the First World War Studies and a senior research fellow for the Center of Army Leadership, Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. He's the editor of the book series Video Games and the Humanities, as well as a co-presenter on What a Lovely Podcast, which explores the portrayal of the First World War in pop culture and media. But it's his historic perspective on the Star Wars universe that brings him here today because he also literally wrote the book on the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. Please give a warm hello there to Chris Kempshall. Woo!
Hello there.
Hello.
Thank you very much for having me. Well done for struggling through what feels like the entirety of my CV.
Yes, and I will probably re-record after. So for those listening right now, that when it sounded amazing, it did not the first time around. Chris, are you ready to share with the world what Star Wars means to you?
I am very, very ready to share with the world what Star Wars means to me.
That's our favorite answer around here.
So we start with we start with 5 with the Force. This is just 5 basic questions we ask everybody. Think of it as your Star Wars saga baseline. Our first question's kind of easy. We just changed it up. Which Star Wars movie is your guilty pleasure?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think that the easiest way to answer this is, so I don't know if it was the same over in the US, but over here in the UK recently, they re-released all of the Star Wars films like week by week in the cinema. So you could just go and kind of rewatch them in the cinema if you wanted to.
Oh, wow.
And obviously because, unlike when I was a kid, cinemas are really expensive now. Trying to get tickets. So I'm only going to pick one, and I'm going to, so eeny, meeny, miny, and I went and watched Revenge of the Sith, the cinema. So maybe, maybe that's the answer to what is my Star Wars guilty pleasure. Because in theory, I could have gone and watched any of them. Now, I'd seen some of them slightly more recently than Revenge of the Sith, but that was the one I wanted to go and see at the cinema.
That's the prequel kid in me is very happy with that. Yeah.
It is such a great movie, especially the first 20 minutes on the large screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember that at midnight in May 2005, sat there absolutely freaking out because the opening is amazing.
Yes. Oh, just those war drums.
Yeah, and then the sensory overload of, I have vertigo in the cinema.
Okay. Question number 2, I need a 6-sided die for this.
Oh, I wasn't sure if you wanted to roll, just in case I brought my own.
Oh! Go ahead and roll it. Yeah, please do.
Yes.
I grabbed
the first guest to do their own D6 roll. I love this.
Yeah.
I grabbed a D6 out of my Warhammer box. So
Nice.
It is number 2.
Number 2. Okay, so who is your favorite minor character?
Oh, that's a really good question as well. I mean, I feel like I'm almost contractually obliged to say Beaumont Kin at this point because, I'm going to get some pretty angry emails from him if I don't. So at this stage, I think both of my favorite minor character and certainly the character which I have become most kind of protective of might
Yeah.
probably be Beaumont Kin. Obviously, in my eyes, he's a major character, but I understand in the
Sure.
grand Star Wars
Well-
thing, he's a minor character.
I'm sure when you bring voice to someone, all of a sudden they become a major character. I know when I bring voice to myself, I'm the major character in my story.
We're
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the main
100%.
characters in our stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I talk about writing the book, Beaumont Kin barely gets a mention, and he hates that. But because my name's on the front cover, I get to talk about my book.
Solid answer.
Number 3, what is your favorite line to quote?
I don't know if this makes me like a well-balanced person. I quote Palpatine quite a lot in a day-to-day life, and quite often, or you both like the benefit of us being able to record this now is that my asthma isn't bad for this time of the year, which is quite unusual. But when it is bad and my throat completely goes, I do a real good Palpatine
Oh, that's awesome.
thing. So I think the line that I've been quoting most recently is long have I waited. That kind of Revenge of the Rise of Skywalker Palpatine line, because it's surprisingly useful. Like if you're waiting for a bus, if you're waiting for like some popcorn, if you're waiting for the internet to load, any of these things become kind of increased by injecting some really sinister Palpatine into the equation.
That's awesome.
He has some of the best lines for just everyday events, and no matter what they are.
He's so sassy. Yeah.
He is so sassy.
You could just apply it to anything.
And in fact, the line that I quote from Palpatine isn't even my favourite Palpatine line. My favourite Palpatine line is his, are you threatening me, Master Jedi, in Revenge of the Sith. Because it's the first real moment when you get to see like the arrogant Palpatine underneath. It's like, you've walked in here and you've threatened me. Don't you know who I am? To me, that has always been who Palpatine is. That line is him the first time you see him on screen as Palpatine.
The original Karen. Yeah. Don't you know who I am?
Yeah, I would like to talk to your Jedi manager, please.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%.
What is Yoda's assistant's name? I'm taking notes.
I'd like to shoot some lightning at them with my hands.
Besides the movies, what is your favorite Star Wars content? This could be a TV show, a comic book, a novel, a game.
So I'm crushingly aware of the extent to which I'm a cliche. Because anybody, if they talk about Star Wars with me in general, or if they're held captive for like a dinner party, or in one of these things, like there's a ticking clock to the moment when I start talking about Star Wars Galaxies, the old online game from the early 2000s, which was everything I have ever wanted from a computer game experience. It is my favorite piece of Star Wars. It's my favorite computer game of all time. I wouldn't have written the book. We wouldn't be sat here talking to each other now if it wasn't for Star Wars Galaxies. It's probably one of the most important things that's ever happened to me. So it's going to be that.
I love that.
Because it was like a big online multiplayer game, so you could you could live in Star Wars and you could battle, so you could take part. But I wrote a ton of fan fiction when I was playing Star Wars Galaxy, set in the server and then expanded out into the old kind of legends and the like. And that was quite a formative like training for me of managing all of these competing storylines. So it's always going to be Star Wars Galaxies.
That's awesome. And we'll touch more on that shortly.
Oh God, I've got if people are playing along with Chris Kempshall bingo sheet at home, we will be returning to the Star Wars Galaxies square.
There's one whole bingo sheet that's just Star Wars Galaxies.
Yeah. In fact, it's just the box to Star Wars Galaxies. And you just put a big cross through it.
Our final question for Five with the Force.
Yeah.
Is...
I've had a lovely time, everybody.
And thank you so much.
So much for joining us. We're going to cut this short. Yeah.
3 months to schedule, 15 minutes to do.
Yeah.
Question
number 5 is, what era of Star Wars would you like to live in most?
So I'll give the very short, like the Star Wars Galaxies era, obviously, just after A New Hope, because that's where I did most of my Star Wars living.
Yes.
But actually, really not that, because that sounds dreadful.
Yeah.
I reckon the post-Endor period would be interesting to live in. Now, obviously, we know it doesn't turn out to be great, but there must have been a feeling that it is going to turn out to be great.
Yeah.
Like a slightly more hopeful period, and a period
Renaissance
where
almost.
Yeah. And you don't have to worry about like some insane Sith Lord just blowing up your planet and stuff. it's peace at a cost, but it's still peace, and that
Yeah.
feels like a good time to explore and live in.
I like that.
I like the idea of a story of a planet of people who live in fear of a Darth Sith, like a Darksider just coming in and destroying their planet. Just like, could you imagine?
How horrifying it must be.
Yeah.
It must have been like what 1985 and the nuclear arms race was to me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Just horrific.
Yeah,
Well,
but all the time.
yes, but all the time. And that, like, not even with warning. All of a sudden, there's just something in the sky, and you're like, "Up, there's a shadow of the sun today. better pack in the horses. We're done."
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that email's not going to get answered.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
My auto away. Sorry, I can't come to the phone right now. I am atoms.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we can if I can pull this into a little lighter place. What was your first introduction to Star Wars? And can you walk us through that experience? And then tell us how it led to Star Wars Galaxies.
Yeah, so I don't remember a time when I didn't know Star Wars. Like I've always been aware of it. And one of the things I've told other people about is I kind of feel cheated of my Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father moment. I have no memory of not knowing that. So I never got my Empire Strikes Back twist. It's just always been something that's in my head. And over here in the UK, we recorded the Star Wars films, although for some reason not Empire Strikes Back, off of the TV on old VHS cassettes during the 1980s. And, I watched those to death. But they also came with like ad breaks in them. So, like the Emperor would arrive and then it would cut to like a bunch of 1980s adverts, which was real weird watching Star Wars now. It's like, where's my Christmas sofa sale? Where have all the weird clothes gone?
So you kind of watched them so much that those commercials became part of the experience for you.
Oh yeah, 100%. That's part of the viewing experience for me now. And then obviously, we get the dark times when there is no more Star Wars. And, I would play like Star Wars games on my Game Boy and the SNES and all those different bits and pieces. But then I think like year zero for me, for kind of this latest kind of like the kind of further wave of Star Wars was I was on holiday with my family and it must have been like 1997, something like that, 97, 98. And we were on holiday in Florida. And in downtown Disney in Florida, there used to be a big Virgin megastore that was like 5 stories high. And like the third floor was books. And I was wandering around there looking for something to get. And I picked up Spectre of the Past by Timothy Zahn. I was like, I like Star Wars. I like books. Maybe I'll read a Star Wars book. And then just ate it in like 12 hours. And from then onwards was just like, right out into the expanded universe.
Wow.
And that was also the era that you started getting like really interesting computer games as well. So Star Wars Rebellion, which was a PC strategy game, which I love and I still love. It doesn't properly work on my PC anymore and I'm really upset about it. But then you had like some of the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games and it just, all roads ended up leading me further into the directions of Star Wars that I liked. And from then you got the prequels and you got like all the books that came with that. And then like the new Jedi Order books. And then Star Wars Galaxies. And I just kind of like slowly immersed myself, like kind of lowering Han Solo into the carbonite thing. But it's just me surrounded by Star Wars boxes. As I said, further and further into it. And from then onwards, like Star Wars has, was a big part of my life and, my personality. Whilst I hid it badly behind mild-mannered historian, like beneath the surface, you didn't have to go too far to find like raging Star Wars geek.
Do you find yourself in like, I don't know how to phrase it because I don't know academic circles that well, but with other academics talking about World War I, and you're like, you know what, this reminds me of a moment from Palpatine, and let me explain it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I definitely do that all the time, whether or not my colleagues appreciate that, but they know what they signed up for by this point. Yeah, I do kind of. And there's an element of you're turning your hobbies into fun and into work of the, when you start looking at, computer games, it's like, oh, well, now I can't play a computer game anymore. When you start looking at Star Wars, well, now I can't just watch a Star Wars anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But you do see kind of the links between, and I think my colleagues, I think collectively humor me is probably the best way, tolerate within, very fixed, defined controls of it. But at the same time, beneath the surface of most historians is someone who is geeky about something.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't become like a historian because you don't care about this stuff. And if you don't care about, because you care about this stuff, you care about other stuff that looks a little bit like it. So on that level, I think a lot of my colleagues are like, I don't care about Star Wars, but, I get it because I understand, the things that they're geeky about as well.
That makes sense.
Now, in your experiences, you said you came across Spectre of the Past and you like books and you like Star Wars. Why not do the same? And then that slowly led to Galaxies, where you said that was kind of almost the full, like, now I'm here, I'm a fan. What did your fandom look like prior to Star Wars Galaxies? Was it intense, or was it just, just more of a, it's something I like and it's around?
That's a good question. I mean, I would, because I've got the completionist instinct in me. I was once I read Spectre of the Past, I'm collecting every single one of these expanded universe books. You can't stop me.
Sure.
And I'm gonna read them and try and figure out, because I was also reading them out of order. Spectre of the Past is quite a long way into the timeline for that kind of
it is.
Era of the novels. And, it would be talking about things like the return of Emperor Palpatine. It took me ages to figure out that was in a graphic novel. So I kept buying random books. So with the Carillion trilogy, because they used to have at the back of the books like little promos for the other books. And for the Carillion trilogy, it was like Han Solo and Luke Skywalker are up against a new threat, and you'll never guess who it is. I was like, well, it's clearly Palpatine. And no, wait, no, it's Han Solo's cousin. Can't believe I didn't see that one coming. So in that sense, I then I gathered up a lot of the expanded universe novels, to the extent that, so I mentioned the strategy game Rebellion.
Yes.
Where you can kind of play as the Empire, and you can play as Rebel Alliance. I used to print off lists from pre-Wikipedia, so it must have been like random pages on Wikipedia of the names of various Imperial Star Destroyers, so I could then name my Imperial Star Destroyers after canon ships. That kind of level
cool.
of completionist
wow,
desire to it.
There was always a historian in there.
God, just struggling to break out.
Yeah.
Well, it also sounds very much like you were a diehard fan, but Galaxies must have really inspired you to go so much deeper. And you had mentioned that it inspired you to do some fan fiction. What were those like?
So,
and do you still have them? And do you ever tease people
can we have them? No.
And I'm occasionally tempted to go back and read them. So my character on the server that I played on, which was a Pacific time server, which was really inconvenient for somebody living in the UK, but that's where the guild that I signed up with had gone. So time zones was he was an Imperial character, and he was I became head of one of the Imperial guilds. So it was kind of very much kind of framed through the point of view of the Empire. And those started off being relatively short. And by the end of my time on the server, I was writing 40, 50,000 word stories of multiple chapters set in this timeline. But for me, Star Wars Galaxies it's a really weird thing to talk about, both as a fan, but also actually as a historian to talk about, because there were 20 different servers for Star Wars Galaxies. You could go on, there was European servers, there were role-playing servers, there were East Coast servers, Pacific time servers, and all those things. So how do you talk about things that happened in a virtual space that only a fraction of the players saw? Did any of this ever actually happen? How do we quantify these things? But at the same time, it's a story that I've told kind of elsewhere, and also kind of told to friends, that at one point, because the ambition of the developers for Star Wars Galaxies was probably greater than the technology and the funding and the ability at the time. They couldn't deliver on all the things they wanted to promise, or that they promised, despite the fact they clearly wanted to. So it was up to the players to provide content, and we provided a ton of content. So in 2004, 2005 time, all of the Imperial guilds on the server, we're talking about hundreds of players, had for months planned the invasion of Tatooine to destroy all of the rebel bases on there, because it was a rebel occupied and held planet. And we all gathered on Naboo and we all flew up into space and in TIE fighters and in ships. We traveled from Naboo to Tatooine and then we stormed the planet and we marched across the planet. And it definitely happened. I was there. I saw it happen. Like the biggest collection of Imperial players in the history of the server.
Wow.
And it was amazing, but it didn't happen. But it did happen because I was there.
Yeah. Well, that's such an interesting aspect, considering that you're a historian. And you're bringing, I'm going to call it historical context to what you're experiencing at the moment, which is this invasion of Tatooine, which cracks me up. And I find it like your point of view so interesting there, because for me, it would be like an exciting little story that I share with Alora that's like, hey, this one time, you won't believe it. But you took it to a like, let's bring this to life element of retelling the invasion from a historical perspective. Is that right? I mean,
yeah, pretty much, because it was a monumental thing on the server. Like the initial invasion, the battle lasted for 36 hours until they shut the servers down. Like people were pulling all-nighters for it.
What an awesome experience.
And the forum for our server went absolutely alive with kind of people saying, all of this stuff was happening. It was one of the biggest events. If you were to write a history of that server, that's going to be right at the center of it because it was such a massive thing. But there's no record of it. It's only the people who were there to see it and know about it were there. And as a historian, I find that really interesting.
It really is, because when it comes right down to it, that's all history. Like, no one knows about this right now.
No.
And hopefully, like, everyone's going to know in a couple months. But it's like, it comes down to the people who were there witnessing it and then telling that story. And I think
the victors of. Right.
That aspect too. Like, if you guys had lost, you wouldn't be telling us about this right now.
Well, in the end, the Empire did lose. It turned into a 3-month grinding attrition across Tatooine, and the Imperial players got tired first. Our energy ran out before the rebels did, partly because they could spawn in their own home bases, and we had to keep traveling around.
Yes.
But it lasted for months, and in the end, we lost.
Wow.
This is my favorite piece of Star Wars lore I have ever heard, actually. This is incredible.
Yeah.
I had no idea there was this online community that almost shut down or had to shut down a server because of gameplay. Wow.
And it only existed in the lives of, 500, 1,000 people?
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's a great story. I'd love to see the documentary on that. Like,
I would watch
all
that
the people from this event, like retelling it from their POV. Also, with that layer of they're playing characters within the Star Wars universe. That's spectacular. Yeah. That's so funny.
What the extra? I'll get off my Star Wars Galaxies was amazing.
Oh no.
But actually, the Star Wars Galaxies lineage throughout Star Wars and Lucasfilm is surprisingly embedded. So there must have been a decent chance that you've had Kelly Knox on the podcast.
Yes.
She used to work for the company she worked for Star Wars Galaxies. She was one of the like, I think if she worked in events or kind of player liaison or something like that. And we've never actually had a proper opportunity to talk about it. But Matt Martin, who's in Story Group, was on the same server as me at Star Wars Galaxies. So there's a chance that he was at the Battle of Tatooine in 2004, 2005.
That's awesome. I kind of want to take this on a slight left turn, not super off track. I've been kind of trying to formulate this question for days, and I don't really know how it relates to Star Wars specifically yet. And it might just be more of a point of conversation. But we're talking about Galaxies. We're talking about video games. You worked on a piece about the First World War in computer games.
Yes.
And I did my master's in communication and digital media, but what I focused on and what I developed was a video game for teaching environmental literacy to kids. So I'm
amazing.
Really fascinated by games as like a vessel for teaching and like educating. It sounds like you are too. But also like an inspiring outlet and like a creative outlet. Like, I mean, it sounds like Galaxies, you kind of credit that as like what led you to this path as an author and historian in the Star Wars universe.
Yes.
And maybe even in life, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm curious of is your thoughts on like the Star Wars games as an expansion of the lore, but also like as a storytelling tool for like educating or like a unifying experience as you've been describing, or like even just like deeper thinking of our world, and like how does that apply to, I don't know, like what we can take from like other games that try to produce the same result, like through your work with the virtual war. Yeah.
So my point on computer games of any topic, but particularly historical computer games, is that they're a gateway to for some people to find out more about the thing. A lot of kind of other historians don't particularly like computer games about history, and like they don't necessarily view it as a worthwhile topic. And obviously, I disagree. But you can see a lineage from people who play a game about a historical event or historical moment. A fraction, a sizable fraction of those, depending on the circumstances, will go on to find out more about that thing, which I, as a historian, think is a good thing. I'm actually working on with a friend on a piece at the moment about do players learn things from playing historical computer games, particularly about time periods or moments that they don't know anything about. And in Star Wars terms, again, Star Wars computer games are a gateway to finding out more. And one of the things that I've always liked about kind of the extra kind of media material around Star Wars, and even to an extent, could be argued some of the film, actually, nothing is essential. You only have to interact with the bits of Star Wars that you want to interact with, that are interested in you and to tick your tick your boxes and the like. So for some people, their first experience of Star Wars might be playing something like Jedi Fallen Order, and Jedi Fallen Order works perfectly within the greater canon, and it adds quite a lot of really super interesting stuff. But also, if that's all you want, that's all you need. But if you want to find out more about the Empire or the Jedi or the Inquisitors, there's somewhere else for you to go and find out more about the things that you decided you care about. And I like that from computer games. I think there's a tendency to ask both too much and expect too little from computer games, by kind of both ends of the spectrum. But they're a wonderful gateway to allowing people to find the things that they want to find.
I love that answer.
Yes,
that's so succinct, and like that's what I don't think I've ever really gotten to myself, is like, if someone asks me, I'll go on some long, very that's the lit review that I worked on. You know what I mean? Like in school, explanation for why this is such an empowering thing and an important part, and how, games are so inspiring. But it's just that it leads to asking the questions and finding the information that you want. Thank you for that.
In that sense, it's quite democratic, because you get to decide how much you want to find out about, and how much you want to care, and what you want to play, and what you want to read. And all of that sounds great to me.
Yeah.
No, that I imagine this like breadcrumbs of information that you just kind of like, oh, I like Jedi Survivor and I like lightsabers. Let me find out more about lightsabers. And you just go down this it's like an open world, but interconnected via what do they transmedia? Just all kinds of media.
And before you know it, they're a Star Wars fan and they're one of us. And fantastic, another one. And they really like lightsabers. That's great. Lightsabers are cool. It's cool that you like lightsabers, and that type of pathway just makes me happy to see people finding the things they like.
Yeah, right on. Thank you for that.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the book, The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. I normally at this point say spoiler alert. I'm not 100% sure if like, I guess spoiler alerts. But I feel like if you know Star Wars, you kind of know the book, and if you know the book, you definitely know Star Wars.
Also, like, half of the title is that the Empire rises and falls. So, like, a lot of the stuff gets dragged away by the front cover.
You should. I mean, for the next one, maybe you put the re-rise of the rise, fall, and the re-rise.
Question mark. Dare you question me?
I think it's great that you started out kind of writing fan fiction, but you're a historian, and then you kind of make this transition from like real to a fictional world of the Star Wars galaxy. Can you take us through how the book kind of came to be?
So, during the pandemic, I had been writing an academic history book about Star Wars called The History and Politics of Star Wars. And it's about how the Star Wars franchise takes on real world events, real world moments, and kind of converts them and then uses them as kind of narrative plot devices. That book was a little overdue, but part of that was because the film schedule kept changing for the sequels and the like. But I was trying to finish the book. And then obviously we had a pandemic, which was, problematic on lots and lots of levels. But also it meant that archives over here in the UK closed.
Oh.
And I couldn't get access to some of the stuff that I wanted. And then in like August 2020, for like a couple of weeks, one lockdown lifted in the UK, and then like a couple of weeks or a month or so later, another lockdown replaced it. But there was a window when the archives reopened. And I went to the British Library to get some stuff for this book and some other kind of other research I was doing. And when I came out, I tweeted out, any historians who are going to the British Library this week who might be worried, because, it's scary. We still don't have we still don't have a vaccine at this point. I felt really safe there. People were masking up. They were using hand gel. There was lots of gaps between people. So I had a good time at the British Library. I think this is going to be okay. And the British Library saw this and said, can we use this as part of our media to announce that we're reopening? And I said, by all means, do whatever you want. And they were like, okay, just tell us a little bit about what it is that you were working on for it. So I sent them a thing. And they tweeted out like a day or like a few days later that, this was my experience, and that I was working on this history book about Star Wars. And within a day or two, I, admittedly to my spam folder, got an email from David Fentiman at DK asking me if I might be interested in working on Battles That Changed the Galaxy with them. That was this official military history of the Star Wars universe book that they were working on. And the answer to that was yes. Yes, I would like to work on that book. So I kind of got signed up for that. And very early on in that process, so all of this was kind of like late 2020 by this point, started thinking, a little voice in the back of my head was like, are you waiting for anything in particular, Chris, before pitching ideas? Because, are you waiting for like a better moment to come along to start talking about the things you've always wanted to do? And I suggested to David this idea about a history book of the Galactic Empire. And he was like, well, let's get Battles That Changed the Galaxy done and all of these bits and pieces done and sorted. So it was only in early 2022 that I met up with David because I was going to go to Celebration Anaheim. It was going to be my first ever Star Wars celebration. They were going to do a bunch of stuff for Battles That Changed the Galaxy because, again, it's still been the pandemic when it had come out the previous year. They didn't do any press for it. So we sat down and talked about what the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire might look like, what this book might be as an idea that he could pitch to Lucasfilm. And that process took most of 2022 because a lot of, Lucasfilm is, it sounds like a simplification to say, it's a gargantuan organization of moving parts, but you cannot conceive of the complexity of all of the things that, just like the Lucasfilm publishing side, which dwarfs most other kind of industries. So, stuff takes a long time because there's a lot of stuff going on. So it took most of 2022, and it was at the end of 2022 that David was like, this is going to happen. We're going to write this book. And I signed a contract, maybe at the end of 2022, maybe at the beginning of 2023, and put together like a chapter list, a rough chapter list, and some like a sample chapter of this probably isn't going to go in the book, but this is like the tone of it for it, which went to Lucasfilm and they liked it and they kind of moved some stuff about. And it was basically from that point onwards, I had a conversation on the floor of a Star Wars Celebration London with Mike Ziglaine about the book. Which was a lot of fun. And it was within a week of Celebration London, we then had like a call with me and Lucasfilm, and we're like, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And then I spent most of last year writing the book. And it was, but all of that goes back to a random tweet from a British archive that got picked up randomly by someone at DK.
That's fabulous.
What is that phrase? Lucky is preparation plus organization? It's not organization.
It's something like that.
Yeah.
What a perfect storm of success, really.
The butterfly effect was really in your
butterfly
favor.
effect. I think that's a perfect example.
Yeah, just the outrageous series of good fortune. And I cut out like half of the story because all of that story goes way, way back of like me even getting to the academic job. Is also the academic Star Wars book is a longer story and also wildly improbable. Like at every step, if this was a film, you go, this is stupid and implausible, Chris.
You'd be like, no.
I personally would find it very daunting to try to approach this style of book, just because there is so much Star Wars material. There's so many, like we were talking about how we're each kind of like the main character in our own stories. Mm-hmm. Well, within the fictional world, Star Wars represents that, because everyone has their own backstory and their own kind of tales and the reason they're somewhere within the galaxy.
It's why the certain point of view books do so well, is exactly that. Yeah.
So what was doing research for this like? What were the fun parts? What were the challenges?
So if we work with the challenges first, because the challenges lead into the fun part, I think. That I'm aware that this sounds stupider than it is. But it's not the first time that I've said something, that sounds really stupid. It's probably not the first time I've said something really stupid on this podcast. Let alone in like the years leading up to this. But we don't know anything about the Galactic Empire. Mm-hmm. Like, so much of what we know about the Galactic Empire is actually based on assumption of what the Empire probably does, and what the Empire probably is. Yeah. But it's never actually been depicted on screen. We assume that the Empire is probably, fairly indoctrinated to kids in schools, but we've never seen it. We assume that like the upper echelons of the Empire are rife with financial corruption and tax evasion, but we've never seen it. We've seen bits of the edges of it. So the challenge was actually trying to figure out, and for a huge amount of this, like the heavy lifting that Story Group at Lucasfilm had to do to help me trying to piece some of this together was ridiculous. Like, they were absolutely heroic. Was trying to find out, okay, what do we know about the Empire in the sense of what has appeared that we can take as an example or a starting point. But then where it starts moving into the fun part was, okay, well, I guess we'll just build this from the ground up then. This will be the first time that any of this has been established. So we're going to have to try and figure out like a flexible, usable understanding of like Imperial economy or Imperial society, and then build it in a way that works as kind of like an overview, but it's not so generically specific that every planet in the galaxy is doing it, but is also not like so localized on one planet that they're the only ones doing it, or like every story that ever features that planet again is going to have to feature this. We didn't want to handcuff novelists in 10 years' time to the stupid stuff the historian wrote. So what it meant for me was like the sheer degree of flexibility and freedom that they gave me at times was amazing, to create stuff that I really, really wanted to explore, or talk about re-examining stuff that had appeared on the screen or appeared on the page, and me taking a different approach to it. Go, all of this is great and all of this is valid, but what if we look at it like this? Does it change things? It doesn't undercut it, it doesn't undo The Empire Strikes Back if we look at the Battle of Hoth like this. But what does happen if we look at the Battle of Hoth like this? Does it change how we might think about the Empire or bits of Star Wars? So doing that was amazing. Like, being able to work with that level of freedom around this a massive thing that lies at the heart of Star Wars. Everything in Star Wars orbits around the Empire. The Empire is the most important thing in Star Wars. Yeah. As far as I'm concerned.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's the main big bad in all of Star Wars always. I guess the Sith could be slightly atop that if you're talking about like Knights of the Old Republic and stuff. But it's always an empirical kind of feeling, an impressive government kind of feeling.
Yes.
Yes.
Did you find yourself at all like hyper focused on things that you just really liked and found it difficult to like pull back? Or like for me, the book would be 30 pages leading up to the Battle of Hoth, the Battle of Hoth for about 600 pages, and then the rest for the last 20.
So there were things I really, really wanted to put in the book from like the very beginning that were on my wish list, to the extent that some of them could only really be discussed with Story Group in person. So in September last year, I was at like an academic conference in Canada, and then at the end of that conference, everybody else went home and I disappeared for a week and then reappeared back home in the UK. And I went to San Francisco and I went over to Lucasfilm and I sat down with Story Group and some people there and had this kind of meeting. And, one of the things was I want to introduce this re-examination of Hoth I want to do something different with the Battle of Endor. I want to do some of these, like a variety of other bits and pieces. And they were like, yeah, no, this sounds fine, Chris. If you do it like this, we'll, write it out. We'll take a look at it. But the hyperfixation for me manifests itself in a different way in that I knew with reference books when I was, and with reference books and with history books in general, people have a tendency to, I'm going to go to the chapter that I want. I'm just going to go to chapter 17 because this is the thing that I'm really, it's about, I don't know, Inquisitors, and I really want to read about Inquisitors. And that's fine. But the way that I envisage it is that when you get to the Battle of Hoth and when you get to like the Battle of Endor chapters and when these kind of re-examinations, it pays off a bunch of stuff that is mentioned at stages or in passing throughout the book. So you get something from it if you just go to that chapter. But if you read it chronologically, then when Beaumont Kin's making his arguments and his conclusions, they're on the back of the 20 chapters that led into it. So it's like a spread hyper-focus of, there are key important things that Beaumont Kin flags up about the Empire that he places repeatedly throughout the book so that when he pays off at them, and this is the end point of all of this stuff that we saw in the 10 years of the Empire beforehand. This is the natural conclusion of all of this awful stuff they did.
Wow.
While you're doing this research, were there any surprises, like discoveries or insights you came across during your research that you were like, oh my God, I didn't know this, or like, this is a big shocker to me. This kind of redefines maybe Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi or Last Skywalker for me.
I don't know. Outside of that, oh God, we don't know anything about the Empire moment. I think having done the book now, and it's interesting that this has become a part of kind of recent Star Wars anyways, is a reappreciation for the, not an appreciation because God, the man's garbage, but of how important Tarkin is. Like, all of these roads, and you see it, in Bad Batch, and all of these things, like, oh, this thing sounds a little bit unpleasant, and oh, look who's turned up. All roads lead to Tarkin in the early parts of the Empire, and just how important and how key he is for all of this stuff. And that certainly led when I was writing it to go, actually, maybe something like, if we look at the Battle of Yavin, you can build another Death Star. But when Tarkin's gone, he's gone. And this man who effectively is the Empire, far more than apparently Darth Vader is in A New Hope, and certainly more, than we know about the Emperor in that time. But everything that's happening is going through Tarkin, and that was something that came out as I was reading and thinking and researching the book about. Tarkin casts a really long shadow over the early years of the Empire, and his absence is pronounced for the rest of the Galactic Civil War.
Yeah, the book really does capture that feeling that when they lose Tarkin at the Battle of Yavin, the Empire stumbles because of it. And no one knows like who's in control, and there's a little bit of, a Game of Thrones at that moment to get back into the Emperor's good graces.
And Tarkin's clearly not a genius. We see it at the Battle of Yavin, but he's the guy in charge. There is a benefit to having one man making all the decisions. Even if the plan's flawed, at least it's a plan. Yeah. And he's clearly very, very good at all the little minutiae and the details and the like the spider in the middle of the web.
Yep.
Yes. Speaking of Tarkin too, how do you take these fictional larger than life space opera characters and then present them from the perspective of an in-world historian? I mean, it's just so like...
It's daunting.
Yeah.
It's daunting. Yeah. Yes.
It was daunting. I think the way to do it was to basically play it completely straight. As they're not space opera characters. Yes, they might be larger than life, but there are larger than life people in our world, and they're still real.
Yeah.
Yes. Is
to look at them as they are, or kind of draw conclusions based off of what we know about them. And in the first chapter of the book, Beaumont Kin goes in real hard on Emperor Palpatine. With justification, the man's a monster. But it's based around his personality. These are his character traits. He's arrogant. He's petty. He's vindictive. Yeah. And to focus in on those, the things that we know about these people, and to treat them like that, to treat them as, rounded individuals who, in a lot of cases, are absolutely monstrous. That, these people must have been terrifying to be around. Even, in the Empire, it must have been terrifying to be around Darth Vader. It must have been terrifying to meet the Emperor. Having to do anything with Tarkin must have been really intimidating. And to look at these figures and the things that they do and just play it straight, that these must have been who these people are. And as a result, to let in, and quite a lot of the book is designed around Beaumont-Kin letting in from the edges, like his own sheer horror at these awful things that have happened. And they were done by just these guys who did these horrible things. And to let that seep its way into the book and seep its way through to the audience by just treating it seriously, treating it as if it's an in-universe history book, because it is an in-universe history book, and that's the way that it must. It's the only way that it could have been written by Beaumont-Kin.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you said about Palpatine and being a monster, while also presenting him in a real-world way, the idea that we don't know about the Empire and what it's actually doing. I like in the book how Palpatine is the monster, like is being revealed as the monster, because there's moments where you talk about how, oh no, propaganda made him look young and more like the senator that he was, as opposed to the dictator that he is. And I felt like that was a really interesting layer of almost fog of war or gauze over, like that you see why the rest of the Empire, like your everyday schmucks like me, go, oh, yeah, Senator Palpatine, he's a pretty good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I played the Star Wars Battlefront 2, the Inferno Squad game, and in one of those levels, it's full Operation Cinder, and you're on a planet and you're supposed to be extra.
That's right, yes.
And there's a poster of Emperor Palpatine on the wall, and it's pre-melted Emperor Palpatine. And, bits like that was like, well, why? Clearly, unless that's recognizable to people, and it's like, that's what the Emperor looks like, why would you put a picture of when he doesn't look like that anymore? So then you start working backwards. Well, okay, what's the rationale? What are the decisions that had to have been made for that poster to be put up on that wall? Clearly, there's a benefit to people seeing him without, melty face.
Yes.
Yeah.
Becky in PR was like, we can't show melty face. Let's
Yeah, not before the watershed, guys. Come on.
Chris, we always love to ask all of our guests, what are the top 3 elements that make Star Wars to you?
That's a really good question. Okay, firstly, wars. It's 50% of the title. There has to, it's the joke. It's not Star Peace. There has to be some form of conflict there, which is an important part of Star Wars. And as a result from that, there has to be degrees of good and evil. Star Wars has that degree of good and evil, but it's a relatable sense of good and evil that, the audience can understand. And, sometimes the good and evil blend in quite close to each other, Rogue One and or, but it's there, we understand it. But I think the last element, which is a really interesting one, particularly in regards to the book, because at times there's a noticeable absence of it, is that Star Wars is about hope. Hope is absolutely intrinsic to Star Wars, which is weird because Beaumont-Kin doesn't appear to have an awful lot of hope. It's been beaten out of him by the end of The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. But what I've said to people is that Beaumont-Kin is hoping for hope at the end of the book. He's hopeful for things to be hopeful about. And I think that is even taking from, A New Hope to Leia in Rogue One, that belief that this is worth it, or whatever whatever we're trying to tear down, the thing that we want to replace it with is better. It can be better. Tomorrow can be better. The day after can be better. Is absolutely infused in Star Wars for me.
Solid answer. I would have expected nothing less from a historian.
Who's wasted his life thinking about this type of stuff.
No, never.
Wisdom is never a waste.
Never. Wisdom of all kinds.
What is your favorite Star Wars memory?
So, I could talk about being sat in the cinema watching some of the films. Like one of my favorite cinematic memories or moments in my life is being sat in the cinema at midnight for The Force Awakens, because it was like a carnival. People cheered, they were clapped. It was a wonderful communal atmosphere. And, being able to walk into a bookshop and see my book on the shelf is pretty top high
that's
one.
Pretty, yeah.
But I think as a kind of combined thing, Star Wars Celebration Anaheim is way up there for me, because I'd never really expected to go to a Star Wars Celebration. It's like, it's expensive, and I don't know what I'd do there and all these things. So not only going to LA for it, at Celebration Anaheim, I was on the publishing panel. I did some signings. I got to meet the other authors, Cole Horton, Jason Fry, Amy Radcliffe, who are all actual proper Star Wars people, far more than I am. And were all lovely. But, I never knew if I'd ever meet any of them, who just existed through Zoom screens and like for writing battle.
Yes.
So all of that was just absolutely and absolutely life transforming for me. I was talking to friends and family back home going, for years and years and years, I've wanted to be an academic historian, and I don't think I want to do that anymore. I want to do this. That level of all of my previous life plans have completely changed. This is what I want. But also there's a fun, so I really like Superstar Destroyers. I think Superstar Destroyers are super cool and super interesting. And I'd like to collect like models and toys of them. And back in the 90s, shortly after I started reading Spectre of the Past, there was like a Star Wars like titanium series of small die-cast metal ships, so you could get like X-Wings and you could get Star Destroyers and like. And I saw on the back of one of the boxes that I bought at Downtown Disney that there was a Super Star Destroyer version, and I looked for ages to try and find it, and I eventually managed to buy one off of eBay like 5-10 years later, and I took it out of the box, which was stupid, but I wanted to play with it. I wanted to hold it in my hands.
If that's what you love, never stupid.
Absolutely. And then I went to Star Wars Celebration Anaheim, and there was the Rancho Obi-Wan exhibit in the Anaheim Convention Center, and they would like various bits and exhibits and bits and pieces, and you could go into, at the end of it, pay like $5 or something like that, and go into a spin the wheel raffle, and it would say how many things you could pick off of one of 3 tables, and I paid $5 and I spun the thing, and it was like you can get 2 things off of table A, and it was just random Star Wars merch. And this is going to be irrelevant to all of those listeners, but on Star Wars table A was the updated Super Star Destroyer titanium diecast toy in the updated which I'd spent decades looking for. I was like, I will have that, please, as the kind of monument memorial to this Celebration Anaheim experience. And this one has not come out of the box. This one sits very nicely on the shelf.
Now, Chris, can this is maybe a personal question, but can I have some of your luck? Can you just like scrape some of that off and like, I don't know, email it to me or something?
God, I think I'm running dry at this point. I've ticked off a lot of things off of my list in the last 2 or 3 years. I don't know how many I've got left.
Very good karma out there for you. Yeah.
what when you say that, what's one of the things like top of your list that you can cross off that you're like, yes, I stepped into the Star Wars universe?
Well, so I started my history PhD in 2008. So it's now 16 years later. And in fact, I started it in January 2008, so it's nearly 17 years later. So I've been trying to be a historian for 17 years. I've wanted to write Star Wars novels and the like since I was like 14, 15 years old. So the very fact I have a Star Wars book that exists in the world is absolutely wild to me. It is effectively everything I have ever wanted. But in that Star Wars book is the character that I used to play in Star Wars Galaxies.
I love that.
As a tiny Easter egg to me, the Imperial character that I used to play in Star Wars Galaxies is in the Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, and it makes me ridiculously happy.
I love talking to Star Wars authors, because there's always some little tidbit like that comes up, and I just find it so charming. We just spoke with Claudia Gray, and she
amazing.
She tells an amazing story. I don't know if we'll have to cut this. I don't know in what order these are going to get published, but she tells this amazing story about how she was at some event and was talking about wanting to get some ice cream, and they were like, "Oh, well, there's no ice cream in Star Wars," and she was like, "Bet." And wrote ice cream into Star Wars. Yeah.
That's perfect. I know a lot of fans sometimes, and it's completely understandable, they kind of like they look at something in like a book or in a TV show. Why is this in there? Is this part of a wider thing? Is this a plot point? And, sometimes it is, but quite often it's because it made the authors happy or they thought it was funny. And that's a wonderful way of putting stuff into a thing. There's loads of random little stuff in like Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, which are just dumb history references that I find amusing. And, stuff like, I put my Star Wars Galaxies character in there because it made me happy.
It gives the work a heart and depth that, like, even if you're not aware of it, like, you are. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, it makes it more human. Yes. Like, yeah.
Yeah. It's a shared endeavor made up of, it's like a communal finger painting.
Yeah.
That, if you zoom in real close, you can see the individual fingerprints, but together it's just a big, beautiful thing.
Yeah, you have to add that spice. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So our final question for you, after talking about all this Star Wars Galaxies, but, you had a rich Star Wars life well before Galaxy and definitely well after. Having talked about all this, what would you say, what does Star Wars mean to you?
Oh, God. So, when I got Spectre of the Past and, ate it up, and my most anticipated ever book was Vision of the Future, the second part of that Hand of Thrawn duology. And that seemed to take like an ice age to come out in the UK.
Yeah.
See, I don't know. I think it came out like later in the UK than it did in the US. I think in the US it was like a year later. It felt like 2 or 3 years to me. But I think I mentioned earlier on that, when at certain times of year, my asthma gets bad. Basically, a lot of my friends joke that they know when the temperature has changed because Chris disappears for 3 weeks. Also, as I just retire to my bed. So when I was like 14, 15 years old, like every autumn, winter, the weather would change. I'd just be completely laid up in bed for like weeks on end. And I'd read Star Wars novels. I would sit there and I would read the old Legends Expanded Universe novels. And those were my kind of my companion when I was in my sick bed. And then, Star Wars Galaxies and like flesh it out. But
it's okay.
God, this is really hard.
No, it's okay.
No, it's totally okay.
To go from that to hopefully there's going to be a kid reading
yours.
Yeah.
That is congratulations, because that's remarkable. Yeah.
That's remarkable.
I'm looking forward to like Christmas Day because people are going to open it. Like, maybe. But some of those are going to be kids and they're going to read it in bed, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's going to be someone's first Star Wars too.
God, I really hope so. I mean, it's a rough first Star Wars. There are easier ones to read first. But and I think it even I even bring it up in the acknowledgement. This might be your first Star Wars book, and if it is, I really hope that you go and read more of them. But for that, like, there are going to be people who put it on their Christmas list. It's insane to me, but it's wonderful. But it's absolutely mad.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll say that. Oh, sorry, Dave.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, because we both get emotional over Star Wars as well. This is deeply like personal for you, and I see that and I hear that, and I just like getting to know you over the last hour. I'm so happy for you right now. Like, I'm genuinely just so thrilled that has been your Star Wars journey, and that is a very real thing that is happening out there. Is that like you are now kind of like passing that on to the next generation of Star Wars kids, and I'm just excited for you as like another human. Yeah,
thank you. It's probably the best thing that's ever happened to me, and it's a deeply ludicrous thing, but
no, it's not.
But it is. Like, I was joking to people. I was joking to like Jason Fry and Cole Horton and the like. At Celebration Anaheim before our panel, because Mike Siglain was there, and he was like, there's quite a big queue out there, for people who are excited. And I said to them, like, literally nobody outside is stood there going, I really hope the historian's here. None of them are being like, what I think that Star Wars has needed over the past X number of years is a British First World War historian to really shake stuff up. But the fact that I'm here now and like people like it, and they're not trying to kick me out or anything like that makes me very, very happy.
Yeah, you definitely proved them wrong.
Yes.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your Star Wars journey with us. I love, like Elora's exactly right. I love talking to you, Chris. I want to keep talking to you. I really want to get Kelly Knox on the horn and be like, hey, can we do a Battle of Tatooine reunion, like, roundtable and just interview like a bunch of you about the Battle of Tatooine?
Can we do this? I want to be the podcast that breaks the story on the Tatooine server battle. Like,
so I don't know if Kelly Knox was on that, but Matt Martin was. I think jokingly. I mean, I say jokingly. I'm not joking. Have suggested like the three of us do like a celebration panel reflecting on Star Wars Galaxies at some point. But yeah, I will come and talk to whoever wants to listen to me talk about Star Wars Galaxies. I think it was the most astonishing thing. And,
incredible.
I talk a lot about, I miss Star Wars Galaxies. If they were to bring out Star Wars Galaxies now, and, there are emulators and mods and the like, I've played some of the other ones. I miss that time in my life playing Star Wars Galaxies. I don't have the time and the freedom to play it, to stay up till 4:00 in the morning because I'm playing a Pacific time server or the like. So I a lot of it was at that moment in my life, it was perfect to me. But oh God, it was just the best thing ever.
I mean, when you look at it, Star Wars represents a time in your life. And I'm talking about anyone, any fan. That was like a perfect moment that hit them at just the right moment for just the right thing. And I think that's part of why we all kind of conglomerate around it and it has so many different aspects. Lightsabers, Inquisitors, space wizards, gritty war, it's in there.
And,
smart, powerful female leaders. That was big for me as a young girl. Yeah,
100%. Who wouldn't want to look up to Princess Leia? And there's going to be a generation looking up to Rey and Mon Mothma now. Who wouldn't want to do that for a living? And that Star Wars has exactly what you need it from it at pretty much any point in your life. It will deliver whatever it is that you need for a certain circumstance.
You're right. Star Wars is the giving tree of entertainment.
Yeah. In this festive season.
Festive season. Chris, if folks want to find you, where can they find you online?
So I often joke that one of the benefits of being the only Chris Kempshall who's ever existed is that my online branding becomes real easy. So,
that's true.
Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram. It's Chris Kempshall. It's just me knocking about there. I've got a website which is imaginatively entitled chriskempshall.com. So that is where to find. The splintering of the social media fellowship has been quite annoying.
Yes,
but it looks like people are kind of starting to gather at certain places, which is useful.
Yes.
So those are probably the best places to find me.
Perfect.
And all those links will be in the show notes as well. So
fantastic. Thank you.
Chris, again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
This has been a huge pleasure. This is one of my favorite conversations we've had thus far.
Really
thank you so much for starting. I mean, it's Tuesday when we're recording this, but it feels like the start of my week. So thank you for bringing in so much positivity to that. Yeah.
Yes. Chris, thank you, and may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with both of you. Thank you so much.